Welcome to the Greater Montana Foundation Legacy Project, preserving the history of Montana broadcasting and the pioneers of communication whose vision and foresight brought together the people of Montana.
Hello, I'm Vic Miller, and joining me today is a former Billings resident, a member of the Montana Broadcasters Hall of Fame, and a gentleman who for years has been recognized as one of the top sportscasters in the country, Mr. Brent Musburger. Brent, good to have you with us.
Vic, nice to be with you.
Before we discuss your broadcasting career, at the time of this interview, you were in Billings to participate in an event dedicating a Little League baseball field in honor of your late father, Cease Musburger, who's credited with bringing Little League baseball to Billings. Your thoughts?
Well, it was such a time in the early 50s. I was playing recreation baseball, Vic, and I would go home to Cease and I'd say, you know, Dad, it's just not enough opportunity for youngsters. I said, they play a couple of teams, but everybody else kind of stands around and watches. So Cease had read an article, Vic, in the Saturday Evening Post, and it said that Little League Baseball had started in Pennsylvania. I think the fellow's name was Bill Stotts. And so he wrote him a letter. Stotts answered, and Cease and Gene Lissa got together and started Little League Baseball, and Dave McNally and all of those great names in Billings came out of it, and it was terrific. Cease was always very close to youngsters and sports, and loved doing things for the community, and I'm sure that he would be greatly honored by having a field in his name.
Well, Lissa, of course, located on Rimrock, and was there for a number of years. I know both our sons played there. I coached there for 3 years, and I really have some warm memories of that facility.
Yeah, it was a great corner lot, wasn't it? And Gene Lissa, who of course owned the Ideal Bakery here in Billings, he had the real estate, and Cease and he got together, and they decided that they would build the field over there, and so many youngsters would come and play. But I do remember, I mentioned Dave McNally. He would go up and help Cease rake the infield. He would show up with his black Labrador, and one of the few youngsters who would ever come and help Cease prepare the field. I, on the other hand, was ducking any kind of manual labor at that time, Vic, but Dave McNally would step in and fill the bill, and Cease loved him dearly for it.
He was a great guy, and as we talked before we went on the air, he left us far too early. Yeah,
you know, the memories are great with Cease, and his wife, Burrow, my mom, she lived about 20 years later and stayed with us. But we've always been very close to the state of Montana. We've spent time, love the early days in Billings. I tell people that growing up in the 50s in Montana, it was as good as it gets. I didn't know, for example, that the doors on houses had locks. I didn't know that you didn't leave the key in the ignition in a car. It was just such a different, innocent time. And Little League Baseball, and my father came along and provided an opportunity for me to get really deeply interested in sports. Would love to have played, would love to have been as good as Dave McNally and all those other youngsters that came out of here, but that wasn't going to happen.
You began your career not as a sportscaster, but as a sports writer.
Right. That's what I really wanted to do, and actually there's a story in Billings that contributed to it. Cease was the head of the Midland Roundtable group here, and they promoted athletic events. The University of Montana would play Wyoming, for example, in the early fall. And he brought the Harlem Globetrotters in to play at the Shrine Auditorium, sponsored by the Midland Roundtable. And there was a sports editor of Chicago, legendary sports editor, who had started the All-Star football game and the baseball game by the name of Arch Ward. And my father sat me between he and Mr. Ward. And I happened to say I was interested in becoming a sports writer. And he said, young man, go to school, work as hard as you can, and maybe someday you'll be able to come to Chicago and work for the Tribune. And I never forgot it. And I went to Northwestern, and I didn't go to work for the Tribune, but my first job was at the Chicago's American, which had been a Hearst paper, but it was purchased by the Tribune. So in effect, we were the Chicago Tribune's afternoon newspaper. And that's where my career started, around sports, Vic, and that led into broadcasting and the rest, of course, and all the other things, great things. But I really have enjoyed, and I'm blessed with the fact that I was able to stay around sports. I mean, it's the only thing that I've ever done, and I wouldn't have missed a minute of it. The people I've met and the different broadcasters I've worked with and everything, it's been wonderful.
You have covered just about everything under the sun, from the Masters golf tournament to college to NBA. What are some of the things that stick in your mind?
The fact that it was such a variety, Vic. Not being a big-time athlete and having a name like Musburger, I said, there's something you better do, and that's be decent at anything they want you to do. If they want you to sweep the floor out in the studio, let's get that done the best way possible. If they want you to cover track and field, if they want you to do golf, if they want you to do tennis or baseball, football, whatever. So I like the fact that I have been around so many different games and different venues around the world. That has been a blessing. And I've had outstanding analysts and people. I think that the one show that the public probably remembers me the most for started in 1975 would probably be the NFL Today, because it was a studio show.
Right.
And we had Irv Cross, who had been an athlete at Northwestern and an outstanding one when I was a student there. And so we knew each other. Phyllis George, who was Miss America, I did not know till she came on the show, but she was a lovely person to work with. And in the second year, they called and said, "Do you know Jimmy the Greek?" And I chuckled and I said, "Yes, I met the Greek in Las Vegas." And we brought him in. He had a little spice to the show. I thought what was interesting about the NFL Today was the fact that I knew it was an uneasy relationship between the National Football League and gambling. Gambling had contributed, and still does today, to the growth of that league. But I also know they were very sensitive about point spreads and things of that nature. So Jimmy and the head of CBS Sports and myself, we had a meeting with Pete Rozelle, who was then the commissioner. And he asked us not to mention that someone was a 6 or a 10-point favorite. We could make it clear in how we discussed offense and defense and special teams that one team was favored over the other, but he asked us directly not to use point spreads. So we never did. And then we went back and we devised a little checkboard that we used, and Jimmy would check the favorite for the offense and defense. But the one that always got everybody was the last one, was called intangibles, okay? So the Greek was a really good friend of Al Davis's. I mean, they were really close. And the Raiders, this was in the Raiders' heyday, okay? So every now and again, about 2 weeks before the Raiders would play, let's say, the Denver Broncos, the Greek might say, "Now we hear there's a little turmoil in the Broncos locker room." And I would know, if I went and looked at my little pocket schedule, the Raiders are getting ready to play the Broncos in a couple of weeks. But it was a great fun time, and I learned an awful lot about professional football, the great people who played it, coached it, some of the owners, and so it went from there. But the variety of things, which leads back to your question, the variety of things that I've been around, I think that was probably the most interesting part of my career.
At the dedication ceremony, you mentioned a couple of outstanding events in your mind that you have done fairly recently. One of them was a Billings team a few years ago that went to the Little League World Series.
Yeah, Vic, because of Cease and what we've talked about with the Little League, and the fact that I did the Little League World Series for a decade, it was very special to have a team from Montana finally make it, and it was especially special to me that it was the old hometown of Billings. And then the team that pushed on into the final in the dramatic way that they did, hitting a home run, walk-off wins, and the enthusiasm. And I knew, because I was hearing from so many people back in Billings, my old friends, I knew that everybody was watching and was glued to this team. And obviously, I can't show outwardly. I mean, everybody knew I'm from Billings. I mentioned it, They understood it, but I had to kind of be really careful with when you were dealing with another team from California or anything like that. But it was a very satisfying moment in my career. And the other one you referred to actually also involves Montana. I was in our place down the Bitterroot, Hamilton, and I received a call from ESPN. They said, somewhat reluctantly, they said, you know, Brent, we've got a game up the road in Missoula. It's a week before the season starts, so you won't miss any of your SEC games, but would you be interested in doing Montana against North Dakota State? To which I said, I'll walk to the game. You know, they were surprised, but I had never done a Grizz game. And they built us kind of a makeshift little set up on top of the roof that was kind of tin covered. And Jesse Palmer, the old Gator quarterback, played with the Giants and the Niners for a while. He was my analyst, and he'd never seen anything like it. But the enthusiasm of the Grizz fans and the performance by the team in the closing minutes of that game to beat then the 4-time champion. Now they're the 5-time. Of course, they beat them in the playoffs back in Fargo. But having the memories of Montana and having grown up listening to Cease tell me stories about the Grizz and the Bobcats and all of that, it was great. I really enjoyed. I just hope that the Bobcats are good enough someday that they'll ask me to do one of their games.
I hope so. The enthusiasm of that crowd for home games in Missoula, that wall of sound is almost physical.
You know, there's a coach down at Houston now by the name of Tom Herman. He had been the offensive coordinator at Ohio State when I ran into him. And we were talking about stadiums and noise and disruption. And he didn't know where I was from. And he said, I will tell you, I was an assistant coach at Sam Houston State. And he said the toughest noise we ever encountered was in Missoula, Montana. And my ears picked up like this. He said, not only is that crowd noisy, but they're very knowledgeable. He said, when the Grizz has the ball and they're barking out changes and the signals, and he said, very quiet. And we get the ball, he said, you couldn't hear yourself think. He said, I've never been around anything, and the sound kind of cascades down in the Washington Grizzlies Stadium. And we experienced it that day that we broadcast the game. But it is special. And when the players come out of that tunnel onto the field, and they're led by Monty and everything, and the eruption from the crowd, it's a wonderful scene in the state of Montana, and it's something that everybody should be proud of. And I know so many of the players are, and you know, gosh, every year there's at least one or two of those kids that leaves and gets a shot at the National Football League and plays pretty well. Obviously, they don't have the depth of the number of players that a team like Alabama or Ohio State. We all understand that, but the first team in particular, the level that they achieve in the FCS is truly outstanding, and I loved every minute of it over there.
They've played some great teams over there. I remember the year they played Marshall.
Oh, yes.
When Randy Moss was there.
Oh, man.
And of course, it's like Jerry Rice.
Exactly. He was the Jerry Rice of his time. There is no question.
Yeah.
And there's still some people around Missoula chuckle when you mention his name and trying to defend him. And that was a heck of a Marshall team, I'll tell you that.
Oh, it was awesome.
Yeah.
The way that we determine the national championship in football keeps shifting around a little bit. What would you like to see?
Actually, Vic, to tell you the truth, I'm satisfied with what they're doing right now.
Okay.
When the BCS was a little too political with the computers and you get out of a computer whatever you program into it. So I was never completely satisfied with that. And then when they went to the 4-team playoff that we have now, I thought initially, I'd rather see them go to 8. We're leaving out teams that are pretty good. But the more I thought about it, and the more I've experienced it, and I think these are outstanding gentlemen who choose the 4 teams. And yes, one of the Power 5 conferences, whoever the champion is, not going to make it. And 2, if any conference sends 2 in. But I think that the thing about the college football season that I like better than, let's say, the NFL or NBA or any other season is the fact that the regular season is so important. As we tape this, I'm getting ready to do a game between Clemson and Auburn on the opening weekend. Clemson's very, very highly ranked. But let's say they stub their toe, okay, on that first game. It's critical. They cannot afford to lose that first game right now. Whereas if you had 8 teams or an expanded, it would be, oh, okay, boys, let's regroup. We've got a lot of time. We can still make this playoff. I like the importance of the regular season with college football. And after a couple of years, the only thing I didn't like, and they're going to try to change it, I didn't like games being played on New Year's Eve. You were not going to reinvent history, and we all know what happens on New Year's Eve. And sometimes that day falls on a work day when people are going home, and that first game is being played. They don't have time to sit down and watch the game. But I'm sure they're going to address it, and I think they should stick right where they are for the time being, and we'll see what happens.
On the other hand, in basketball, Podunk U has an opportunity to be the top team in the country.
There's no question. There's no question. But football and basketball are different sports, okay? In football, you need more than, let's say, 2 or 3 outstanding players. Let's take Wichita State a few years ago, okay? Made a serious, deep run in March Madness. If you have 3 top-flight players in basketball, you can make a move on any college team in the country and play with them. And if things break your way in the one and done, you can keep going. I just think, Vic, that the difference between what it takes to win in those 2 sports separates them in terms of tournament play. Now, I know that, having said that, I know that Montana and the FCS teams are very, very happy with what they do, okay? And a lot of teams are able to get into the playoffs, even though they've suffered 2 or 3 losses during the regular season, and it works out for them. But I think for the time being, my recommendation of the FBS would be stick with this and let's see what happens.
You mentioned March Madness. There's those who say that you coined that phrase.
Well, yeah, you know, Vic, it wasn't so much coining it. I was working in Chicago and I was on the air, and we had great high school basketball in Illinois, okay? And the teams would go down to the University of Illinois in Champaign and they would play their tournament, okay? And there was a car dealer in Chicago who actually had a sale the time the tournament was on, way back. This would have been probably 75 or something like that, and the headline was March Madness. Well, the Illinois State High School Association actually kind of picked up that headline, and they sort of used it with their tournament. And then when I went back to New York, and CBS got the NCAA tournament from NBC. NBC did the semifinals and the final at that time, and CBS wanted to broadcast all the games. When we got it, I was in the studio at night, and I would use the big board that we had, and I thought, listen, there's no better term than the one I brought from Illinois, and that's March Madness. So then it was sort of interesting that down the road, the NCAA sued the state of Illinois and said that they owned the rights to March Madness. So of course the attorneys call everybody, and I got a phone call, and I said, listen, you do not want to interview me on this because I'm going to tell the truth of what happened. And I brought that from Illinois. The State High School Association used it before I did, and certainly before you did, okay? So just take it from there and do whatever you want, okay? If you want to come in and depose me, come ahead, but I'm going to tell you what happened. So they made a financial settlement, and the NCAA paid, as they should have, the Illinois State High School Association money for the use of the term, and now they have it exclusively March Madness. But it's a great term, and it describes everything that goes on. I mean, goodness, all of us on that first Thursday of the tournament, you know, we all, at some point during the day, it's madness, you know, something happens somewhere, Vic. So, but that's how it came to be.
Performance-enhancing drugs. We just finished with an Olympic event that pretty well wiped out Russia. Where are we going with this?
That's such a difficult question because the drugs, the performance-enhancing drugs, are way ahead of the police in that particular area. I mean, no one should sit around in the United States and pat themselves on the back and think, we got those guys in Russia, boy, trust me, Trust me, there's American athletes who get into those drugs as much as the Russian athletes do, or the Chinese athletes, or anybody. They're available, they're being used, and I don't know specifically what the answer is. At the professional level, these guys are trying to get healthy, they're trying to get back on the playing field, they're trying to be a little quicker. At the collegiate level, they're trying to rise to that level so they can make a real good living. The high school level is very, very troubling if those youngsters get into it, you know. I would think that this issue belongs in the hands of the doctors. You know, they're the ones who should come to us and say, you know, are they really, I'm going to tell you an example. Barry Bonds came back this year as the hitting coach for the Marlins, the Miami baseball team. Mm-hmm. And they train about 15 minutes from where I live in Florida. So I went over. I've known Barry a long time. It was just a pleasant chat. It wasn't about anything in particular. Wished him well and everything. But I have to tell you, he looks so dang good. I was almost ready to say, Barry, whatever you were taking, can I get some of that? I mean, it was like, you know, I mean, all of that flab that he'd had on in the last couple of years with the Giants was gone. And he, you know, he didn't seem to be depressed about anything. So I don't know what the answer is to the issue. It's up to people a lot smarter than I am to determine. But I know one thing. The only thing I do know, it's not going away. They're out there. They're being used. And just as the drug authorities catch up with one drug, they'll come up with another one. That's just the way that world seems to operate.
Professional sports teams are not unlike gypsies anymore. They're here today and someplace else tomorrow.
Right.
Is that ever going to end? Or?
Well, we're coming. I would say, Vic, that yeah, I think because they're running out of cities. Now they got a couple of them left. Okay. The National Football League has primarily Las Vegas and San Antonio. San Antonio's become a major market, and Major League Baseball could use it and things like that. But I think as long as cunning businessmen can use leverage for new stadiums, you will see it exist. Now, I never thought I'd see the day that Vegas would become a serious competitor to gain a National Hockey League team, leave alone a National Football League team. But already, the NHL, led by Mr. Tom Foley, who bought the team, they're going into Vegas to play. And the Raiders, led by Mark Davis, Al's son, they want to go in to play. The city wants to build them a stadium. And so we'll see, we'll see how that shakes out. But as long as there are markets available where they can use leverage against the taxpayers, they will.
Do you feel the commissioner has too much power, not enough power, or just about the right amount of power?
Well, in a couple of instances, I say he has too much power, and that stems from saying, and let's just take Roger Goodell as the example. If you set the rules and there's an appeal, I'm still not quite sure that you should be hearing the appeal.
Yeah.
That kind of bothers me a little bit from a legal standpoint. I also do not agree with what happened in the Tom Brady situation. Okay, but let's be perfectly clear. Tom Brady obviously likes footballs at the low end of the pressure level, no doubt about it. And some quarterbacks do. Other quarterbacks like it, maybe even overinflated. I think Aaron Rodgers at Green Bay, as I read, I've never asked him, but as I read, he liked a ball that was heavily inflated. But I want to go back to Brady. The day in question against the Indianapolis Colts, when he was taken down, balls were confiscated at halftime. And some of them were low, and there was air put in them, and they thought that air had been taken out. But the league really did not explore the science of what cold air does on air pressure. But to me, the overwhelming statistic in favor of Tom Brady, beyond a shadow of a doubt, was his statistics in the first half were abysmal. His statistics in the second half in a playoff game worthy of a Hall of Famer. So I'm saying, wait a minute. You're telling me that you put more air in these footballs, okay? You gave them to him. You said he's in trouble. He took your football and he went out and he carved up an NFL defense. Then there was another story that made the rounds about somebody intercepting one of the passes and they thought that too much air was out of the ball. That never happened. You know, that was a wives' tale. The youngster who intercepted it kept the football because he wanted a souvenir. I intercepted the great Tom Brady and it went over there. So, you know, I wondered and I was so puzzled, Vic, about the National Football League taking a Hall of Fame quarterback into federal court. I said, what are you doing that for? I mean, you're running down basically your own product. So going back to your question, I think there needs to be a committee composed of players as well as the commissioner's office and things hearing these appeals. I don't think they belonged in federal court over whether or not there was too much air in the footballs that Tom Brady had thrown that day. And I think that anybody reasonable who looks at the statistics of the first half versus the second half, a good judge would look up and say, so what's the issue here? You know, I mean, end of story.
Your brother Todd is also involved in sports.
Yeah, he's you know, Todd's an agent. He's worked with a lot of broadcasters and athletes and coaches and Phil Jackson. You know, Todd worked with Phil when he was a Chicago Bull coach and later with the Los Angeles Lakers. Now he's general manager of the New York Knicks and that. Yeah, Todd's, and his one son works with him in the office in Chicago. So yeah, he stays very close to it.
We have about 2 minutes left. You've shown no signs of slowing down. You want to do it forever?
Yeah, it's a good question. Vic, you're legendary in that regard. I mean, you kept going. I can't spell the word retire. And, you know, it hasn't been, you got to get up at 6 o'clock and you got to punch a clock. And, no, I've been blessed. And I've been around something I love. And if I wasn't doing it in the booth or the field or whatever, I'd be watching it anyway because I love it. I love the competition. So, no, I don't want to. I don't want to stop doing this. I really don't. It's a great pleasure, and people ask me about the travel, and I say, you know, the difference between my travel and a lot of businessmen is that when I go someplace, I'm going to join up with a group of fellows that I'm really friendly with, and it's like a little fraternity gathering together, and we get ready for our next ball game. I said, a businessman travels. He travels alone. He's got to make his calls. He's got to go back to the motel, and it's lonely. And I said, I can see where that kind of travel wears somebody down. But mine is event-driven, and I'm always looking forward to getting where I've got to go to do a game.
You've done an excellent job. You've been a real credit to broadcasting, and we certainly look forward to seeing you on the air for years to come.
Yeah, thank you so much, Becca. And you know, I got my start listening to all you guys out here in Montana. Believe me, it was a pleasure through the years, and you've done a remarkable job yourself. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you very much.
You got it.
My guest has been Brent Musburger. I'm Vic Miller. Thanks for joining us.
This programming series is brought to you by the Greater Montana Foundation, benefiting the people of Montana through communication of issues, trends, and values of importance for present and future generations of Montanans. And by the Montana Historical Society, Big Sky, Big Land, Big History. And with the help of Cordillera Communications, with stations in Billings, Bozeman, Butte, Great Falls, Missoula, Kalispell, and Helena. Cordillera Communications, the Montana Television Network.